On a Tuesday afternoon in April, my wife and I closed out 43 years of pension and Social Security into an account our own son didn't know existed. We left $84 behind in the old one, like bait. At 6:15 the next morning, my son came through our front door so hard, the storm door bounced off the siding. He had both hands on my collar in my own hallway before I'd set my coffee down, screaming that we'd destroyed his life. Behind him, his wife went straight for my kitchen, yanking open every drawer, hunting for whatever she thought we were hiding. My wife and I didn't say one word back. Not because we were scared. Because there was a camera bolted over that door, running for 4 days already, and neither one of them had thought to look up. They thought they were watching two frightened old people fold. What they didn't know is that everything coming out of their mouths right then had already been recorded, days earlier, before either of them ever set foot on that porch. 3 hours later, both of them were in the back of a patrol car with their hands zip-tied behind them. If you're picturing me as the man who planned all this, you've got the wrong Pruitt. I didn't see 1 inch of it coming. My wife saw the whole shape of it while I was still telling her she was reading too much into a bank statement. It took me 3 weeks to catch up to something she already knew in her gut. I want to walk you through exactly how that happened, because I think a lot of you are sitting somewhere right now with a version of this same feeling low in your stomach, and you don't know yet if it's nothing or if it's everything. My name is Harlan Pruitt. Nobody's called me that since 1974. Everybody calls me Hoot after a night supervisor who said I looked like I never slept, and it stuck so hard my own mother started using it. I'm 68, and outside of 2 years in the Army, I've never lived anywhere but the Mississippi Gulf Coast, Biloxi mostly, with a stretch in Gulfport when the boats first came in. I spent 33 years as a slot technician on the boats and later the land-based houses. People hear that title and picture a man with a screwdriver popping a panel when somebody's ticket printer jams. That's real, but it's maybe 1/10 of the job. The back half of my career I was inside the cabinets themselves. Boards, hoppers, bill validators, and later the whole network side once everything went server-based. I know how those machines work down at the schematic level, and I'm going to tell you the one thing about them almost nobody outside the business ever learns, because it's the spine this whole story hangs on. A slot machine has never once, in the history of the world, taken $1 off anybody. It can't. There's no arm that reaches out and pulls money from a purse. Every dollar that goes into one of those machines is handed over freely by a person, one pull at a time. And the single most important piece of engineering in that cabinet isn't the payout percentage. It's the near miss. 2 sevens and a blank. A jackpot symbol sitting one position above the pay line, close enough to touch. That is designed on purpose by people paid well to design it. Because a loss that looks like a loss makes a person stand up and walk away, and a loss that looks like an almost keeps the hand moving to the next button. 33 years I stood on that carpet watching that mechanism work on strangers. In about 10 minutes, I'm going to tell you the exact same mechanism ran inside my own kitchen for almost 2 years, aimed at me and my wife by our own son, and I did not see it. Out of every man in Harrison County, I'm the one who should have. My wife is Corinne. Everybody's called her Corey since she was a girl. 43 years married this November. We met in 1983 at a diner off Pass Road, where she worked the counter to get through nursing school. Before she discovered she didn't want to be near sick people. She wanted to be near their paperwork. She spent 29 years in medical records at the regional hospital, most of it in clinical coding, reading a doctor's chart against a billing sheet, hunting for the line where the two didn't agree. That's not a hobby. That's the actual skill she got paid for. 3 decades of finding the line that doesn't reconcile. I've teased that woman for 4 decades about her filing. 3-ring binders in the hall closet going back to 1988, tabbed in her own hand. Who's ever going to need all that, I'd say. Turned out one person did, and it ended up saving us close to $127,000. Our son is Dalton. Everybody's called him Dutch since he was small, after a cartoon dog he loved, and it stuck. He's 40. I need to tell you about Dutch at 9 years old, because everything later comes out of that boy. When I worked swing shift, Corey would drop him off before I clocked out, and he'd sit in the break room with a root beer and his homework, and then we'd walk out to the truck together. That boy loved the whole world of it. The carpet, the noise, the techs in the back shop, with their bins of circuit boards. He'd ask what every part did, and remember the answer. From 11 to 22, that's the only thing my son ever wanted to be. Then the floor changed under all of us. Somewhere between 2003 and 2009, the industry moved to server-based systems, and the shop I worked in went from 22 technicians to 7, and they were never hiring again. Wasn't anybody's fault. A door just closed, and he was standing on the wrong side of it. He sells commercial insurance now out of a strip office near the interstate. 15 years, and I have never once heard him say a warm word about it. 7 years ago, he married Peyton. She's 35, does injectables and laser work, owns a piece of a medical spa out in Ocean Springs. Corey knew something was off inside the first year, not about money, about the shape of the woman. After the third or fourth Sunday dinner, she said, "Hoot, watch how she looks at this house." I said, "What house?" "It's a 1974 brick ranch with a window unit that rattles." "Watch anyway," she said. So I watched, and what I saw was a woman doing an appraisal, her eyes moving across our front room the way an adjuster's eyes move across a wrecked car. I said she was probably just nervous. Corey looked at me with the patience she's used on me since 1983 and said, "Okay, that's a specific word for her, when she's sure and I'm not. She says okay and waits." And she's been right something like 9 times out of 10 for 43 years, and I've learned almost nothing from the pattern. Dutch changed slow, the way weather changes. The Sunday calls thinned out around year 3. Then the visits went from spontaneous to scheduled. Then he'd sit there while Peyton did the talking, nodding at things I wasn't sure he agreed with. I said he was busy. Corey said he's careful. And careful isn't the same thing as busy. 2 years ago, this past March, he came over alone, sat at our kitchen table with coffee going cold in both hands and said, "Dad, I want to help you and Mom with the bills, the online banking, the app, the autopay." He said it wasn't a knock on our generation, and I didn't take it as one. And he smiled at me, and I have to say this clearly, because if I don't, nothing else makes sense. That was the real smile. My son's actual face, not a performance. I've gone back over that afternoon 300 times hunting for the tell, and there isn't one because there was nothing yet to find. That March, he meant it. The rot came later. It always comes later. Most people aren't sitting there in the spring plotting out the fall. So I said, "All right, we'll put you on the checking account." Corey stood in the doorway with a dish towel and didn't say a word. After he left, she said, "That was a mistake." I said, "He's trying to help." She said, "Is he helping, or is he being sent?" It took her 2 weeks to find the first 4 lines. She laid a statement on the table, careful about it, too careful, which is how I knew before she spoke. 4 charges. "These don't match a single bill we have," she said. "Nothing enormous. 210, 340, 195. Close enough to real bills that you'd skate right past them." I said, "Maybe there's an explanation." She said, "Maybe. Let's find out how bad it could be before we ask him." That's my wife in one sentence. Not let's confront him. Let's find out how bad it could be. She pulled 6 months of statements and sat at that table 4 hours with 3 highlighters. Yellow for questionable, orange for definitely not ours. A green check for anything tied to a real invoice. There was almost no green. Somewhere in that same stretch, smaller things started going missing around the house. The kind of thing you don't connect to a bank statement at first. My good cordless drill, gone from the shed, and I told myself I'd loaned it to somebody and forgotten. A set of my father's fishing rods, gone from the rack in the carport. Corey's grandmother's silver serving set, the one we only ever used at Thanksgiving, suddenly missing 2 pieces from the felt-lined box. Nothing that screamed theft on its own. Just a house getting quietly thinner around us, one object at a time. And neither of us saying it out loud yet, because neither of us wanted to be the one who said it first. 6 months. $21,400. I'm going to tell you what I did when she showed me that number. Because it's not flattering, I argued. Told my wife there were probably transfers she didn't understand, that some of it might be him paying something early, that we should ask him before assuming the worst. And I said one sentence I'd give a lot to take back. I said, Corey, you've never liked that girl, and I need you to be honest about whether that's coloring this. 43 years, and that's the worst thing I've ever said to her. She didn't raise her voice. She never has. And that quality is more unnerving than any amount of shouting. She said, you're right, I don't like her, and that's exactly why I pulled 6 months instead of coming to you after one line. She let me finish 2 or 3 minutes of me talking in circles, then said, Hoot, he's had access 2 weeks. This is 6 months of statements. I sat down hard, because she was right, and it took about 4 seconds to catch up to the size of it. He got formal access in March. The withdrawals started the previous October, which meant when my son offered to help with the bills, he wasn't starting anything. He was formalizing something he'd already been doing for 5 months. Through an old online login we'd set up as a favor back in 2018 and never removed him from. That's the morning I stopped arguing with my wife, and I haven't started again. 3 days later, Corey pulled an old cigar box down from the hall closet. My father's things, a compass, service pins, and his watch, a gold Hamilton he wore every working day of his life and I'd worn exactly twice. At my wedding and his funeral. The box was there. The watch wasn't. I stood there a while telling myself I'd misplaced it. Corey just wrote the date in the back of her newest binder under a tab that said open questions, and kept going. Because she doesn't chase a feeling until she can back it with paper, she called Thaddeus Voss the next morning. Everybody calls him Thad 71, does elder law out of an office on Howard Avenue, wrote our wills back in 2009. Corey set the binder on his desk. By then it was a binder, table of contents in her own hand. He read 11 minutes without a word, then looked up over his glasses and said, Mrs. Pruitt, how long did this take you? A weekend, she said. I've had forensic accountants hand me less. How far back did you pull? 6 months. Pull 3 years, he said. I said, Thad, he's only had access since March. He took his glasses off and said, Mr. Pruitt, the access isn't the crime. The access is just the part he was polite enough to ask permission for. 3 years. Corey went back to the credit union and asked for Denise Okafor, the branch manager, who'd known us the better part of a decade. Denise looked at the statements, looked at my wife, and asked one quiet question I didn't expect from a bank employee, but that turned out to matter more than almost anything else in this story. Mrs. Pruitt, is somebody taking advantage of you? Corey said, I don't know yet. Ask me again in a week. That week was the longest of my life. The 3 years of records came back on a Thursday. I was out in the carport when I heard the front door. Then her footsteps stopped dead in the hallway. Not slow down, stop. I walked in and knew before I reached the kitchen that something had changed. Papers everywhere, she wasn't crying. My wife doesn't cry easy, but her face had gone a color I'd only seen once before. Over her mother's casket. How much? I said. 126,850, she said. I sat down. Had to. Over how long? 23 months. Starts at 300 a month. By this summer it's 4,000 and 5,000 a shot. And Hoot, it's always within a day or two of a deposit landing. I want to slow down here, because this is the second it turned over inside me, and it had nothing to do with the number. Within a day or two of a deposit. My pension hits the 4th. Social Security hits the 2nd Wednesday. For 23 months, my son knew my deposit schedule better than I did, and he waited on it. He wasn't taking what he needed when he needed it. He was taking the moment the well filled. That's not a man in a jam. That's a man running a system. Then Corey set one more sheet down. A credit line application, $22,000, my name at the top, my signature at the bottom. I studied it a long time. Close, genuinely close. The H was right, the loop on the P was right, but my last letter always runs downhill, has since I was a boy, because I'm already moving to the next word. This one sat dead level. That's not mine, I said. I know, Corey said. I already knew. How? Because it's too neat. Yours has never once been that neat. 29 years reading charts against billing sheets, and she caught a forged signature in 6 seconds, then sat with it an hour waiting for me to catch up. That's the moment it stopped being a family disagreement in my mind. Every withdrawal, every dollar, a good lawyer calls a misunderstanding about scope. You cannot misunderstand your way into forging another man's name If you've ever had proof handed to you about someone you love and felt yourself reaching for a reason it might not mean what it plainly means, that's not stupidity. And it's not quite denial either. It's your whole nervous system voting against the evidence. Mine voted no for 3 weeks. Corey never voted at all. I think because she'd already grieved it quietly, alone, around week 2. While I was still out in the driveway building explanations, Thad laid out the legal picture on a Tuesday. Elder financial exploitation, forgery, likely identity theft once the loan's traced out. Mississippi takes the elder statute seriously, he said, and we were long past a kitchen table conversation fixing this. Then he said the thing that mattered. You cannot confront him. I said, he's my son. I have to. Thad said, the second he knows, 2 things happen. He starts explaining, and he'll be good at it. He's had 23 months of practice, and every piece of paper still in his house goes in a bag by morning. Here's what you do instead. Cut it off without a word, and let him show you who he's become. Corey asked how. Thad Voss said, he'll come to the house. Here's what we did. We opened an account at a different institution across the state line in Alabama, one neither of our kids had ever heard of. Corey handled the paperwork, because Corey always handles the paperwork. Pension and Social Security redirected, effective next cycle. We left the old account open with $84 in it. I asked Thad why not 0. 0 looks like a decision, he said. 84 looks like an oversight. 2 tired old people who forgot a step. We wanted the reaction to happen at our house on our camera, not filtered through some lawyer's letter 3 weeks later. That week I put a doorbell camera over the front door, $85 from the hardware store, 25 minutes on a stepladder, fighting the mounting bracket. My neighbor Reggie Boudreau came over while I worked. 22 years retired Army, an old military police sergeant who still wakes at 5 out of habit with nothing left to inspect. He held the ladder and asked what I was up to. I told him more or less the truth, that somebody might come to the house upset and I wanted a clean record. Reggie didn't ask which somebody. He just nodded like a man who's watched plenty of families come apart slower than they think anybody's noticing and said, Hoot, make sure that thing's got audio, not just picture. Picture alone. A lawyer argues about context all day. Audio. People convict themselves out of their own mouths. I hadn't thought of that. Best piece of advice anybody gave us the whole ordeal. Corey watched from the doorway, arms crossed. You think they'll actually come here? When the money doesn't land, yeah, they'll come here. Good, she said. That's my wife, 66 years old, 5'4", 29 years, reading other people's paperwork. Good. Then we waited 11 days. Dutch called twice. Normal calls. How you doing? How's mom's back? You catch the game. I sat in my kitchen and made small talk about football with my own son while $84 sat in that old account like bait, and I was warm to him, genuinely pleasant. Both times, after I hung up, I went to the carport and sat on that stool a good half hour because I loved him. That doesn't fit anywhere cleanly in a story like this, and I'll say it anyway. In the middle of all of it, on the phone, talking about a football game, I loved that man completely. One night, a Sunday, I think. I got up around 2 in the morning, took the phone off the charger, and stood there holding it 4 full minutes, because every part of me wanted to call him and say, I already know all of it. Come here and tell me the truth, and we'll figure this out as a family. I want that on the record because I suspect plenty of you listening are standing in some version of that kitchen tonight with a phone in your hand. What stopped me wasn't strength. I turned around and Corey was standing in the doorway in her robe. Hadn't said a word, hadn't turned on a light, just been standing there. Put it down, Hoot, she said, and I put it down. That's a 43-year marriage in 4 words. She didn't argue with me or remind me of the binder. She just came and stood where she could see me, and that was enough. The first deposit hit the new account Thursday morning. Corey checked her phone and said it's in. I said, then it starts now. Friday morning, 6:06. It wasn't a knock, and I want to be exact, because it mattered later in court. The door shook under 3 hard hits and then a 4th. Corey was already dressed. Neither of us had slept more than 4 hours a night in over a week. I checked the camera feed. Dutch on the porch, Peyton halfway down the walk behind him. I opened the door. This lasted 11 minutes and 50 seconds. I know. because that's the length of the saved file, and it is still the longest 11 minutes and 50 seconds of my life. He came past me into the front room before I'd said a word. "Where is it?" he said. "Where's what?" "Don't do that. Don't play dumb. The account's got nothing in it. Where's the money?" Peyton came in behind him and didn't stop in the front room. Went straight to the kitchen. I heard a drawer open, then another. In my own house at 6 in the morning, going through my wife's kitchen drawers, hunting for a statement or a card. That's Corey's kitchen. Those drawers have been arranged the same way since we redid that kitchen in 2001. The utility drawer sticks. You have to lift it a half-inch, and I heard her force it hard enough that something inside rattled. For 2 seconds, the only sound in that whole house was a woman I'd shared 6 Thanksgivings with rifling through my wife's kitchen drawers. Corey came around the corner, completely calm. "Good morning, Dutch." That's all. He'd come in at full volume expecting a fight, and she met him with a pleasant good morning, and for 2 full seconds it knocked the ground out from under him. Then he found his footing. "Mom, don't do the calm thing. The mortgage bounced. The truck payment bounced. Do you know what that does to us?" Peyton came out of the kitchen. "You have wrecked our credit. Do you understand what you've done?" I said, keeping my voice level after 11 days of coaching myself to what we've done. "Yes," Peyton said, "what you've done." Corey said, "Dutch, that's our pension. And here's the part I still can't get all the way around. The reason I'm telling this to strangers." My son said, "We built our whole life around that. Around your pension." Said it right out loud, no flinch in his face at all. It came out the way a plain fact comes out. The house out in Belgrass, 2 car payments, the buy-in on Peyton's half of the spa, all of it built on a state retirement check earned by 33 years of a man crawling inside slot machine cabinets. Corey said, "You were supposed to pay our bills, Dutch, not live on us." Peyton said, "You gave him access. That makes it ours." My wife said something I'll remember on my deathbed. "No. That makes it reachable. It doesn't make it yours." Peyton's mouth opened and nothing came out. That's when Dutch put his hands on me. Crossed the room fast. Got both hands on my shoulders, drove me back into the wall by the coat pegs, not hard enough to hurt. And I want to be accurate. It wasn't a punch. It was a shove and a hold. His face was maybe 8 inches from mine. "You're going to call them right now and put it back. I'm 68. He's 44 inches and 30 pounds on me." I had about a second and a half to decide, and this is the hardest thing I did in this whole ordeal. I could have shoved back. Every fiber wanted to. And if I had, what's on that camera is 2 men wrestling in a hallway, and any defense attorney in Harrison County calls that a family altercation, and a family altercation goes nowhere in court. So I didn't move. I let my own son hold his father against a wall in his father's own house, and didn't lift a hand. And I'll tell you honestly, it's the most humiliating 30 seconds of my life, and I'd do it again tomorrow without hesitating. I'll tell you what I was actually looking at, because it wasn't him. There's a row of 4 coat pegs on that wall. I hung them in 1996. The second from the left has a worn mark underneath, about the size of a thumbprint, from a 9-year-old boy hanging his backpack there every school day for 6 straight years. I was 8 inches from my grown son's face, looking past his ear at a scuff mark left by the boy he used to be. If you've ever had to hold completely still while somebody you love did something that couldn't be taken back, because moving would only make it worse or hand them the version of the story they wanted, you know what that stillness is. It isn't dignity. There's none in it while it's happening. You just stand there and go somewhere else in your head, and mine went to a backpack mark on a wall. Corey said, from about 6 feet away, in a voice like a nurse taking a temperature, "Dutch, take your hands off your father." Peyton said, "Don't talk to him." Corey said, "The camera above that door has been recording since Tuesday." 11 seconds, I counted them off the file later, where nobody in that room said one word. I watched my son's face move through 4 stages. He didn't believe her. Then he looked up at the transom. Then he found the lens. Then his hands came off my shoulders like I'd gone hot, and he backed up 2 steps. Peyton said, "You're recording us. That's illegal." Corey said, "It's a doorbell camera on our own front door." And my son said the one thing that whole morning I believe was true. "Dad, I was going to put it back. There it is." I've heard some version of that sentence probably 900 times over 33 years, standing on that carpet out of people who'd just fed a machine everything in their pocket. I was going to get it back. They left. Peyton was still talking the whole way down the walk. Corey and I stood in the front room a long while without moving. Then she came over and put her hand flat against my chest, right where he'd had me pinned, and neither of us said a word. Detective Marisol Trujillo came out that afternoon, watched the file twice, then the first 90 seconds a third time by itself. "Mr. Pruitt, why didn't you push him off you?" "Because I've been married 43 years to a woman who told me not to." She looked at Corey. That was the correct call. They arrested both of them the next morning at the house in Belgrass. I didn't go, and didn't ask how it went. Reggie came over that evening with 2 beers he didn't open, and we sat on the tailgate of his truck in his driveway, instead of mine, because I think he understood I didn't want to look at my own front door for a while. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew, the whole street probably knew by then. He just sat there a long minute and finally said, "Hoot, in 22 years running an MP desk, I never once met a family that thought it was going to be them. Not one. Every single one of them thought they'd have seen it coming." He wasn't saying it to make me feel better, and it didn't. Not exactly. But it sat right, the way true things sometimes sit even when they don't comfort you. Then it got bigger than I expected. Trujillo called us in 3 weeks later with a whiteboard timeline behind her desk. 19,600 in credit card debt opened in my name across 3 cards. 41,000 in personal loans. On 3 separate applications, Dutch had listed our house as an asset worth 610,000, listed himself sole heir, and, this is the one Corey had to leave the room for, indicated we were both in declining health. Told lenders his parents were sitting on money and running out of time, were neither wealthy nor dying. That house is worth maybe 190,000, and I still walk 3 miles most mornings before my hip complains. Then the last figure, 29,000 in casino losses across 14 months. "Whose?" I said. "Mostly hers, some his." I sat looking at ticket out records from 3 casino floors I've spent my working life inside of, 2 I personally serviced machines in. What happened in my chest wasn't rage, it was recognition. I've watched that curve from 6 feet away for 33 years. Could have sketched it on a napkin before anybody showed me a printout. Start small, genuinely fun. Then a hole opens. Then you're not playing anymore, you're chasing. And chasing uses the same machine, but it's a completely different animal. The whole time, what keeps a person in that seat was never winning. It's the almost. It took 4 months before I could say the next part out loud, sitting with Corey on the back steps the night I finally got there. When Trujillo's team pulled the full picture on Peyton's medical spa, it turned out the business had been quietly refinanced twice against equipment that didn't exist on paper, and Peyton had forged 2 supplier invoices months before Dutch ever touched a dime of our account, covering a hole from her own gambling. Dutch wasn't the architect. He was covering for her, covering for herself, 1 layer removed. The way a man does when he's decided protecting somebody is the same thing as loving them. Buried in the 23 months of records, Corey found something that took the wind out of me. He'd paid us back twice, unprompted. $800 that first December, a little over $500 the following March. Straight deposits, nobody had asked. I hadn't even noticed at the time. Corey found both on her 3rd pass and brought them to me. Hoot. Why would he put money back in if he was planning to keep taking more? I looked at those 2 lines and it went through me like a current, because I've known why since around 1990. A machine that never pays out doesn't hook anybody. People stand up and walk out the door. What holds a person in that seat is intermittent reward, small, unpredictable, occasional partial payoff. Those 2 repayments were the most expensive money we ever received from our son, because in the moment we got them without deciding anything, we stopped being 2 parents watching a troubling situation and became 2 players who'd just seen the machine pay. $800 in December bought that boy 11 more months. That's not me being poetic. That's the literal mechanism. Printed on a board inside a cabinet, I've repaired hundreds of times, running quietly in my own kitchen, For almost 2 years before either of us caught it, the cigar box came up again in that same meeting. Trujillo's team had recovered a gold pocket watch from a pawn shop in Gulfport, logged under Dutch's license 11 months earlier, sold for $210. My father's Hamilton. She slid an evidence photo across the desk, and I sat looking at a picture of the one thing that had actually belonged to my father, sold for gas money, and didn't say anything for a long minute. Corey put her hand on my knee under the table, and that was the only acknowledgement either of us made out loud that day. The drill turned up at the same shop, sold the same week. The fishing rods never did turn up anywhere, and I've made my peace with the idea that they're at the bottom of a bayou or in some stranger's garage. The silver, oddly, came home whole, still in its felt box, found in a duffel bag at the house in Belgrass, which told me somebody in that house still understood the difference between a thing you could sell to a stranger and a thing you couldn't quite bring yourself to. The plea process took a little over 4 months. Their attorney, Everett Barber, opened by trying to frame it as a dysfunctional family with 2 greedy, controlling parents at the center, and dropped that entirely the day after the assistant DA sent over the camera file. The assistant DA, Renata Okonkwo, handles nothing but financial crimes against older adults, and she was the third person to look through Corey's binder and ask who put it together. She was straight with us. Trials are unpredictable. Juries go soft on family cases in ways that surprise everybody, and a negotiated conviction you control is often worth more than one you gamble a whole trial on. She asked what we actually wanted. Corey said, every dollar back, in writing, on a schedule. Thad helped us draft what we'd accept, and I want to be clear what was and wasn't in it. No public apology. That isn't a thing a prosecutor can force into a plea. What we got were guilty pleas to felony exploitation of a vulnerable adult and forgery, identity theft counts running concurrent, full restitution just under $213,000 once the cards, loans, and pawned property were added in, paid at $2,600 a month across roughly 7 years, 7 years supervised probation for both, mandatory gambling treatment for Peyton, and financial counseling for Dutch, a no-contact order, and one condition Renata told us mattered more than anything on the document, a full allocution in open court, not an apology. A plain accounting of the facts on the record. That hearing was late October. It ran 22 minutes, and it was the last time I've been in a room with my son, Judge Halloran's courtroom, second floor, a Tuesday morning, maybe a dozen people in the gallery. Corey wore her navy suit, the one she's worn to 2 weddings, 4 funerals, and now a criminal hearing. When they brought Dutch in, I didn't recognize him for a second and a half. He'd lost close to 20 pounds. His suit hung loose, gray at his temples that hadn't been there in the spring. Peyton sat rows back with her own attorney, looking exactly the same, looking at us the way you look at a road closure sign. The judge asked him to state, in his own words, exactly what he'd done. He stood with a single sheet of paper, hands shaking badly enough he had to lay it flat to read it steady. Beginning the previous October, he'd used online access set up as a favor years earlier and never removed himself from, to withdraw money without permission. Total, $126,850 across 23 months. He'd timed the withdrawals to land after deposits cleared. Applied for a $22,000 credit line using his father's name and a signature he'd practiced writing himself. Told lenders his parents were financially comfortable and in declining health, both false, both known false. When access was cut off, he'd gone to their home and put his hands on his father. Then he stopped reading. Anything further? The judge asked. He looked up, and for the first time that morning looked directly at us. I'd told myself every single month it was the last time. Judge Halloran said something I wrote down word for word in the parking garage before I could make myself drive home. Mr. Pruitt. Nearly everyone I sentence from that chair tells me the exact same thing. It's the most common sentence spoken in this courtroom. And it's the reason the total in front of me reads $126,000 instead of stopping at $300. She read the terms, and it was finished. Out in the hallway, he took a step toward us, and his attorney caught his arm because of the order. He stood about 10 feet off, hands at his sides. Corey, who caught the first 4 odd lines in 2 weeks, who built an entire binder in a weekend, who told me to put the phone down at 2 in the morning, who never once cried through any of it in front of me, said, "Dutch, we love you, and we're not going to see you for a good long while." She took my arm and we walked to the elevator. I didn't say one word to my own son in that hallway. I've turned that over more than almost anything else in this whole business. She got a full sentence out. I got nothing out at all. And to this day, I don't know if that was strength, or if the tank had simply run dry. That night, Corey and I sat on the back steps a long while with the porch light off, the way we've done most evenings for going on 20 years, coffee going cold between us. She'd carried the recovered Hamilton out in her sweater pocket, wrapped in a soft cloth, and set it on the step between us without a word. I picked it up and turned it over. It still ran. 11 months in a pawn shop drawer, and it kept perfect time. "Funny thing to outlast all this," I said. "It's not funny, Hoot," she said. "It's just built better than most things people trust with something that matters." We sat with that a while. My father's watch ticking quietly between us, and that, more than the courtroom, more than the footage, more than any number on paper, is the moment I actually felt the whole thing come to rest inside me. Peyton filed for divorce that November and moved to her sister's outside Mobile. Didn't surprise anybody. Corey had called it back in March, before charges were even filed, right at this table. "That woman will be gone within a year of the money drying up," she said. "Off by about 6 weeks. Dutch works 2 jobs now. Warehouse shifts near the interstate during the week. Weekend work at a rental car facility by the airport. Lives alone in a small apartment in D'Iberville. The restitution payment comes on the first $2,600. Hasn't been late once in 14 months. That's a man working 6 days a week to make his parents whole over the better part of 7 years, and there's a part of me proud of him for it, and I don't fully trust that part of myself yet." Corey said something. "In the spring, I've turned over 100 times since." I'd said, "Well, at least he's paying, like he's supposed to." She said, "Hoot, he's paying because a judge and a probation officer are watching him do it. That's not the same as a man actually changing. You're going to have to learn the difference over the next several years, or you'll end up right back in that chair getting pinned to the wall." Then the harder part. If he does actually change, it'll happen slowly, and it won't look like much from the outside, and it won't announce itself. Real change is the most boring thing in the world to watch. If it ever shows up looking dramatic, that's not it. Peyton's sister called us a week after the arrest. Wanted to know how we could do this to our own son. Said Peyton had told her we were declining mentally, confused about our own finances, that the two of them were only trying to help manage things for us. I said, "Maricela, there's camera footage. Over $200,000 documented in bank records. A loan application with my name on it in somebody else's handwriting. Wait for the sentencing hearing. It's public record." She called me a monster before she hung up. I sat with the phone a minute and said, out loud, to nobody, "No, ma'am. I'm just a man who finally stopped paying." Now the hard part, and I'll try to be fair here, even though fair isn't exactly how I feel most days. My son wanted my job. From 11 to 22, that was the shape of his whole ambition, and that trade closed on him, not because of anything he did, but because the industry shifted under a whole generation of men like me, and there was nothing to be done about it. He ended up selling something he's never said a kind word about in 15 years. Then he married a woman carrying a real, serious problem, and down here on the coast that isn't exotic. That happens to somebody's daughter, somebody's dental hygienist, somebody's shift supervisor, constantly, quietly. Most of them are functioning right up until they aren't. I learned later, from Trujillo, that Peyton grew up watching her own father lose a machine shop to a bad year in a worse bank, watched her mother take in sewing to keep the lights on, and swore to anybody who'd listen that she would never again stand in a room and not be able to pay for something. That fear doesn't excuse a single thing she did to us, but it explains the shape of it. A woman terrified of ever again being the poor one in the room will sometimes build a life so far past what she can actually afford that the only way to keep it standing is to quietly borrow the foundation out from under somebody who trusts her. Dutch started covering for her, one hole, covered once, and the covering made the next hole bigger. And then he was chasing, running the exact pattern I could have sketched on a napkin, in the same coastal town I've lived in my whole life. In the same industry his own father spent 33 years inside. Nobody in our family had the vocabulary to name what was happening while it was happening, myself included, and I'm the one who should have. That doesn't excuse a single thing he did. He put his hands on me in my own hallway. He wrote my name on a document in handwriting that wasn't his own. There's no bad decade rough enough to land a man there. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you my son is a monster. Because he isn't. He's a man who got caught chasing. And chasing is about the most ordinary thing in the world, and it looks completely reasonable from inside it. Right up until you're standing in a courtroom reading your own confession off a shaking piece of paper. Here's what this taught me. Straight off a casino carpet I stood on for 33 years, nobody actually takes anything from you. You hand it over, one pull at a time, because you keep being shown an almost instead of a clean loss. Every "I'll get it back to you next month" was 2 sevens and a blank. Every small thing he did right, the calls, showing up for Christmas, those 2 unprompted repayments, was the jackpot symbol sitting one position above the pay line where we could plainly see it. And the thing that keeps a hand moving is never the win. It's always the almost. So here's the one thing I'd ask you to actually go do. It takes about 4 minutes and runs against everybody's instinct. If somebody in your life owes you money, a child, a sibling, anybody, go count up the paybacks, not the loans. Everybody tracks what they handed out. Nobody tracks what came back. Write down every partial repayment, the date, the amount, and what happened in the weeks right after. Then look at the shape of it. If the repayments are small, irregular, unprompted, and each one gets followed within a couple months by a bigger ask, that's not somebody demonstrating good faith. That's intermittent reinforcement, the exact schedule those machines run on. And it's not an accident it's working on you, the same way it works on a stranger at a slot machine. I'm not saying the person doing it is sitting there with a chart, planning it coldly. My son wasn't. Most people caught doing this are drowning, not scheming. But the mechanism doesn't care about intent either way. It works the same regardless, and the only real defense is a piece of paper with dates on it, because your feelings won't catch it in time. Mine didn't. One more thing, because this is genuinely my own town, and I'd be a coward to leave it out. If the person in your family struggling is the one at the machine, there's a helpline printed on every cabinet in this state, and a national one too, 1-800-GAMBLER. Free, staffed around the clock. Not a moral failing. Genuinely treatable. The average person waits close to 7 years to make that call. Don't be average about it if this is you. And the question I sit with most nights now, out on these steps, is this one. When was the last time somebody showed me an almost? And did I write it down as real progress? Or did I let my own feelings tell me it meant more than it did? I stopped in at the credit union a few months back, just to deposit a check. Nothing important, and Denise Okafor came around the counter to say hello. She didn't ask about the case, didn't pry. She just asked how we were doing, and I told her the truth, that we were doing fine. And I thanked her, finally, for that one question she'd asked Corey standing at that same counter almost 2 years ago. Is somebody taking advantage of you? She said she asks that question more than people would guess, and most of the time the answer she gets back is a quick, defensive no, and the person walks out the door, and she never sees the paperwork that would have told her different. She said Corey was the first person in a long while who actually went and found out the real answer before giving her one. I think about that a fair amount. One plain question, asked gently, by somebody with no stake in the answer either way, and a wife willing to go find the truth of it instead of the comfortable version. That's most of what saved us, if I'm honest, more than the camera, more than the binder even. We're all right now, Corey and I. The money's ours again, arriving the way it's supposed to. The house is quiet most evenings. We do what we've done for close to 20 years. Coffee on the back steps around sundown, watching the sky over the pines, neither of us saying much. She still has every binder, tabbed in her own hand, third one from the left on the second shelf. I asked once if she wanted to throw that particular one out. No, she said. That's the year I was right, and you finally caught up and listened. 43 years. Hoot. She's going to hold that one over me until one of us is gone, and at this point she's fully earned the right to. Now I want to hear from whoever's still listening, because I genuinely go back and forth on parts of this. Comment 1 if you think we did right, cutting his access off cold, with no warning, putting a camera up, and letting the two of them come show us who they'd become on their own. Comment 2 if you think we should have sat him down the day Corey found those first 4 lines and asked him straight to his face, even knowing full well every piece of paper in that house would have vanished into a garbage bag that same night. Comment 3 if you think I should have pushed him off me, because I didn't, and I let it happen on camera on purpose, and I haven't made complete peace with that, and my own brother has told me twice, straight to my face, that a man doesn't just stand there and take it. Number 3 is the one that still sits with me most. Tell me honestly what you'd have done in that hallway, and tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. It's a little past 9 here on the coast tonight, breeze coming in off the water the way it does this time of year, and it still gets to me a little knowing somebody's hearing an old slot mechanic talk about his own family while they eat breakfast on the other side of the planet. And here's the one I genuinely want to know most. If somebody who owed you money ever paid a little of it back out of nowhere, and you felt that flood of relief and thought, good, he's finally turning it around. Tell me what actually happened after that, not what you hoped. What actually happened, and how long it took before the next ASIC came. Because $800 in December bought my own son 11 more months of accesses to everything we had. And I didn't understand what I'd been handed until my wife laid it out flat in front of me with a highlighter and made me look right at it. If this one reached you tonight, stay with me a while and stick around for the next one. It's just an old man on the back steps in Biloxi with a microphone, a father's watch that still keeps perfect time, and a wife who was right about all of it from the beginning, and who is, most days anyway, fairly gracious about reminding me of it.